All right, awesome. We are live. Justin's on the phone. This is episode 228 of the In the Tank podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Before we get started, I just want to let you all know we are on YouTube. You can see our beautiful shining faces. If you want to put a face to the voice, I know that most of our audience is doing iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, that type of stuff. But if you would like, we are moving into the YouTube environment, so we're going to be able to do a little bit more interactive type stuff. We're going to have some charts. You'll be able to see what we are talking about. So today we're going to talk about how high is the social cost of carbon dioxide and artificial intelligence, Judgment Day or salvation. This and more on today's episode of the In the Tank podcast. But as always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, we have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. Jim, what is the worst movie you've ever seen?
Oh my gosh. Well, how about Awesomely Bad? Showgirls is the classically awesomely bad movie. That movie is so bad it is hilarious. But actually, happy Brexit Day, everybody. Today is the day of liberty and freedom. They will mark this for centuries in British history. And a little announcement to make. We have a climate conference coming up. The listeners of this podcast and viewers of this video are the first to see it. We will be in Las Vegas, May 7th and 8th in 2020. If you're on our mailing list, you'll be getting this card any day now. And you can go to heartland.org for more information.
Fantastic. The International Conference on Climate Change, number 14? Something like that?
That's number 14. That's absolutely right.
And perfect timing as always, Justin Haskins, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. Justin, what movie do you dislike that everyone else seems to like?
I would say Avatar, but I know that opens up a wound for you, Donnie. So I won't.
Moving on.
I won't go there. I won't go there.
We have producer extraordinaire Andy Singer. How are you, good sir?
I'm good. I don't get a cool
question.
I
don't have a good question for you.
I gotta be honest, I'm let down right now.
Sorry about that,
folks.
All right. So like I teased, we're going to talk about the social cost of carbon dioxide. We're going to bring in our very own Ed Hudgins a little bit later to talk about artificial intelligence. But before we get into any of that, there is an update on our Democratic candidate survivor pool.
Dun dun dun.
Do you want to break the news, or is it too raw for you at the moment?
It's too raw for him. You break the news, Johnny.
Okay, so
he can't handle the truth.
Oh, please. Look,
John Delaney, I don't know what he does in his spare time. He dropped out of the campaign.
I think he's a professional loser, actually.
Oh, boy.
Hot takes. So that affords Jim 10 points, which drops him down into a tie with Isaac, who have 51 points. Justin's at 52, only a point behind. Things are heating up. I'm in a distant last place, so we don't have to worry about me. So Jim, John Delaney, are you surprised? Are there any memorable moments of the John Delaney campaign that we want to reminisce about before he's moved on to the dustbin of history?
I actually heard John Delaney being interviewed on a podcast, believe it or not, and he was touted as one of the least crazy Democrat candidates for president, and that's one of the reasons I picked him. And other than that, I believe he's from I believe he's from the state of Maryland. And perhaps you're right, Justin. Perhaps he is best known for losing, and he's like a big loser, but he's not as big a loser as the people you picked. So that's what I like.
Actually, that might be true technically right now.
Because I'm still beating you anyway.
But I still have Bernie Sanders, and things are looking better than ever.
Yeah,
for my buddy Bernie, they are looking better than ever.
Well, I mean, that ties into like our real first topic of discussion, which is very Bernie Sanders centric. But a couple of weeks ago, we talked about kind of the kerfuffle that happened on CNN. So CNN obviously was being biased towards Elizabeth Warren, basically calling Bernie Sanders a liar during one of the debates. And that seems to have such like blowback. It seems like that has only benefited Bernie Sanders, who is in first place in some of the national polls. It looks like he's doing really well, if not first place in Iowa and New Hampshire, which are the first primaries. So is Bernie Sanders the new frontrunner, gentlemen?
So the answer to your question is he is the front runner. My buddy Bernie is absolutely the front runner. And here's why. I can tell you exactly why right now. For a very long time, the hardcore socialist wing of the party was basically split between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And for a little while, when it looked like Bernie might die from a heart attack, and it looked like Bernie, or whatever his problem was, and Elizabeth Warren looked like she might take the lead, it seemed as though things were starting to, or she did take the lead. It seemed like things were starting to move in her direction. People were really starting to take her seriously. And then there was all this stuff about her Medicare for All plan. And then people started to attack her at the debates. And I think what really happened was people actually started listening to Elizabeth Warren for really like the first time. Really listening to her and realizing that she's like one of the least likable human beings who's ever walked on the face of the planet. And because of that, and I don't mean like because she's a terrible person, like she's mass murdering people or anything, because obviously she's not. I mean, in terms of personality, she's a horrible personality.
Sure.
Right? She just does. And because of that, I think the more time that people saw her, the more they realized that we can't have her be the face of the socialism in America. So what we really need is to go back to Bernie. He's doing okay, actually. I saw him dance in some wedding video type thing. He seemed to be doing okay. Looks like his heart's all right. Who cares if he's super old and, you know, we don't really know what to make of him. AOC likes him, so that's good. She endorsed him, so that helped, I'm sure. And now all of a sudden, the socialist wing is starting to kind of coalesce around him, and they're leaving Elizabeth Warren in the dust, and it looks like she's not going to come back from this. And so I think if Bernie can make it to New Hampshire and win New Hampshire,
like
then
make it like he's
both. With Bernie, it's always both now. He has to physically make it, and he has to actually his campaign has to make it there. If he can get there and win in New Hampshire, Elizabeth Warren is done. Because the general rule is, if you as a Massachusetts senator, this is true, Republican or Democrat, if you as a Massachusetts politician can't win New Hampshire, then basically you're written off as useless, because everybody just assumes you should be able to win if you're from Massachusetts, because all the media and everything, a lot of it's based in Massachusetts. And so if you can't win in New Hampshire, which is right across the border, then you're done. And I think that's where we're at.
Jim, the Iowa caucus, or the first primary, is coming up in a couple of days. Does Bernie Sanders win?
Oh, I think he probably wins, and I think the race there might be closer than people imagine. I think Bernie probably edges it out, and so yeah, Grandpa Abe Simpson will be your Democratic frontrunner, and he is probably going to win New Hampshire as well. And I don't believe there's ever been a nominee from either party that has won both Iowa and New Hampshire and not collected ultimately the nomination of their party. I think it's kind of funny what's happened to Elizabeth Warren. I'm not as mean to her really publicly as the way Justin is. I mean, that's a personal choice on my part, but you know, that's how it goes.
He's just does not let up.
Well, okay, that's why it's a private conversation between you and me, Donnie. I thought it was hilarious. I think. Really, Justin, you're not giving enough credit. I think her announcing this week that she is going to let a 9-year-old trans student pick her Secretary of Education is the one policy declaration that is going to turn this whole thing around. So I think you're very much underestimating her. I think that's going to sweep her to victory in New Hampshire, and then she will make your prediction come right. As a Massachusetts senator, she will win the Democratic primary in New Hampshire, and then go on to victory ultimately in the end.
Oh, wow. All right. Justin, respond. Do you think Elizabeth Warren's going to take the nomination? You think it's going to be Bernie, or Biden's going to hang in there?
I mean, I think that it depends on how long Elizabeth Warren stays in the race, and it depends on
any qualifiers. Just give me a name. Who's going to win this thing?
I think that it's going to be Bernie Sanders eventually.
All right. Well, on that note, let's talk about Bernie Sanders, because obviously, you know, Justin and I might be a little bit biased. We run the Stopping Socialism project here at the Heartland Institute, stoppingsocialism.com. Check it out. And so it would probably be good for us if Bernie Sanders was the nominee. You know, it actually would probably bring a lot of attention to our project. But just recently, there's been a series of Project Veritas videos that have come out that a couple of weeks ago, we talked about one of them where the guy was a campaign staffer for Bernie Sanders, was saying all this terrible stuff about how cities will burn if Bernie Sanders loses or if Trump is reelected, and that they'll make the Chicago Convention of 68 look like a cookout, and they'll have to bring in the National Guard, and then the idea that gulags weren't as bad as they're portrayed. So since we talked about that, a second, a third, and a fourth video has come out showing other people that working for the Bernie Sanders campaign that have said very similar stuff to this. And the stuff is extreme as how that they might get armed, tear up bricks, and basically raise hell over Bernie Sanders' loss if that happens. How they would send Republicans and billionaires to re-education camps and gulags, and other just a litany of extreme things that I have written here. So one time it's an event, 4 times it starts to become a pattern. So Justin, as our other Stopping Socialism guy here on this podcast, should we start to get a little worried, or is this just a bunch of weirdos?
I think both is accurate. I think it could be a bunch of weirdos, and you could also be really worried about it. I think that's totally legit. I think the thing that scares me most about Bernie Sanders is not that I believe he's this fascist sort of person that wants to throw everybody in prison and, kill people and stuff. He's not. Obviously, he's not. But what you have to understand, and unless you've spent time actually lurking around the socialist corners of the internet, which is a very disturbing place to be, unless you've done that, which I have done, which Donnie has done. Yeah. Unless you've done that, you don't know that a lot of these people are really crazy. They really, truly are nuts. They're radical, and they like the fact that they're radical. They call themselves radical. They say that radical things need to happen. And I'm not saying everybody in the Bernie campaign is that way. I'm not saying everybody who supports Bernie is that way. That's obviously not true. Obviously not true. But there is a sizable portion of people, of his supporters, that are extremely radical, that want to destroy capitalism entirely. And I think that Bernie, although he doesn't want to do that in a violent way necessarily, I think he is truly an incredibly radical person that does, in fact, want to destroy the existing capitalistic system that we have in the United States that has made us the most powerful, successful nation on the face of the planet and really in human civilization in all of history. He wants to destroy it. He may want to do it peacefully, but I think that there are a lot of people who are in his camp that don't necessarily care if it's done peacefully. And it's a really disturbing group of people that frankly do not believe in individual rights or liberty. And I really do believe that this is, although we've only seen a handful of these videos that have come out, it is a symptom of a much larger problem that does in fact exist within the socialist camp of the Democratic Party. I was thinking of playing some of these videos, but I don't think the audio is too good. So I'll link them in the show notes for those that are interested in seeing this Project Veritas. They do great work. Jim, so a couple of things. One is, could you imagine the amount of media attention that like the same thing, if it were to happen on the other side of the aisle and some Trump staffers were saying like extreme stuff that would be found on the extreme right? Right. You hear the end of it. And two, I just sent you guys a link to an article talking about how Bernie Sanders is already drafting up a series of executive orders to basically enact on like day one. So what does this all say? Like, should we start getting a little worried here?
I remember if this was reported on the mainstream media, the legacy media, our corrupt legacy media in this country, these videos should be long stories. Cable news, CNN, MSNBC, if the shoe was on the other foot, would do nothing but cover these videos. And they would be on Capitol Hill asking every single Republican to denounce these videos. And if they didn't denounce them, they would be supporting fascist political violence in this country. There is no doubt that is exactly what would be happening if this was on the other side. As I watched these videos, I thought of a couple of things. You mentioned it, remember when Trump was running for president in 2016 and, protesters would come and make a scene in a huge arena, right? And then he would tell his supporters, "Get that guy out of here." And that was reported by the press as Trump encouraging violence against these people. That's not what he said. And then I also thought about the Tea Party movement. The Heartland Institute was very involved in offering intellectual and principled support for the Tea Party movement, so that they had even more materials and education to talk about things like preserving the Constitution and Second Amendment rights and the virtues of a smaller government, because there's more individual liberty. And, you guys might remember, this was not that long ago. It was about a decade ago. The mainstream media would show clips of old people, of grandmas and grandpas, showing up at a town hall meeting and yelling at Arlen Specter about how he supported Obamacare. We need to get rid of Obamacare. And the mainstream media covered that as if it was some sort of dangerous revolution in this country, because a bunch of retirees were showing up at town hall meetings. And then they would have rallies like your friend Glenn Beck, Donnie and Justin, doing a little name drop there, of course, had this amazing rally at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. I think 300,000 plus people came. When the event was finished, there was obviously no violence. There was no calls for violence. It was a very peaceful and a wonderful event. At the end of it, the National Mall was cleaner than it was when they got there. That's what movements on the right happen and tend to do. Movements on the left, these people are actually serious. And these are not just people that's showing up at a Bernie rally. These are his volunteers. These are his field officers. These are people within the campaign. And they are absolutely 100% serious about if they could foment this kind of political violence, and if they could round us up after President Bernie takes office, and people like us will not submit and kneel down, we will not bend the knee to his socialist rule. They are very serious about education camps, about making us think, getting us thinking right. These are the instincts of a totalitarian and fascist mindset. And there it is, out in plain sight, in the front runner for the Democratic campaign. Right. And the corrupt legacy media in this country are completely silent. There has not been a single story on this on CNN, as far as I've seen. And because impeachment's happening, even Fox News, that you would expect to cover pretty well, hasn't been wall to wall with it because there's other things going on. This is really a disgrace to our media, and something to actually genuinely be worried about, because when they say Milwaukee will burn if Bernie doesn't get the nomination, they're not kidding. There are a lot of people out there supporting him that will be at that convention that will, I would guarantee it, take to the streets. They may not burn the whole city down, but there will be violence on the streets if Bernie is denied the nomination once again. So
Justin, we were talking about this a little bit, but one of the common trends between some of these videos is the idea that what is fueling this extremism is this idea that we have no time to waste. The sake of the planet is at stake here. Climate change is threatening the life of every human being and animal on the planet. And one of the gentlemen actually says that because of climate change, we have to consider disbanding Congress and the judicial branch and just have Bernie Sanders and a cabinet of advisors making executive orders. So again, going back to that executive orders, he's prepping these things. Any insight into what that would mean or what he's planning?
I think it's very hard to know exactly what it is that he's going to do. The leaks that have come out about these executive orders have been very vague. We know there's going to be some kind of there's a lot of immigration related stuff, which isn't very surprising since that's kind of an easy executive order thing to do. But there was one in there about a climate national emergency, declaring a national emergency for climate related things, I guess, climate change. And I don't know what that means. I mean, Donnie and I were talking about this before the show. It's like, what is a national climate emergency? What sort of powers do you get when you declare a national climate emergency? And going back to what Donnie just said, I mean, if you are in the mindset of a person that believes truly that climate change is basically like an asteroid headed for Earth that's going to wipe out everything on Earth, and you believe that these two things are comparable, then yeah, you don't care about property rights or rule of law or stuff like that. Why would you? We're all about to get wiped off the face of the planet if we don't do something about this. So why wouldn't you do whatever you possibly could? Why wouldn't you suspend Congress? Why wouldn't you do all these things? If life on Earth is truly at risk, which is what these people are saying, they're not saying life would be harder. They're not saying that, warming is the benefits of a warmer world they're outweighed by the downsides to it. That's not what they're saying. They're saying it's an existential threat to human civilization. I'm not talking about the Bill McKibbins of the world. I mean, they're saying it, but I'm talking about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and people like that. They're saying it's an existential threat to every human and animal and plant on the planet. And so if you really believe that, then what are you capable of to stop something like that from happening? It's really terrifying. And that's the thing. And even if they don't really believe it, because I'm not sure that they really believe that, at least not in the near term. I don't think they actually think that. We talked about this on the last show. But what I do think is that many of their followers do, including many of these people who have been caught on tape within the Bernie Sanders campaign. They really do believe that we're headed for that world and that it really is going to happen soon. And they've got plenty of news clippings and stuff like that supposedly prove it. And that's really the core issue here. If they've created a monster, in effect, this whole group of people who are terrified the world's about to end and that everyone's just doing nothing about it. And so they're building all of this fear and tension and anger and hostility. And when nothing happens, these people are inevitably going to say, well, we just have to make something happen. We don't care anymore. Something has to happen. And that's when you find, historically speaking, you slide into tyranny.
Yeah.
Prophets of doom.
It's a pretty wild stuff. But that kind of is a good transition to the next topic that I want to talk about, which is this big report that was published in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Policy Studies. This is authored by three Heartland. I think they all got to be policy fellows, right, Jim? Kevin Diaratna from Heritage Foundation, Ross McKirtrick from the Fraser Institute, and Patrick Michaels, who works with Cato and the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And it's a study called Climate Sensitivity, Agricultural Productivity, and the Social Cost of Carbon. So just to kind of read through the abstract here, it says, we explore the implications of recent empirical findings about CO2 fertilization and climate sensitivity on the social cost of carbon in the fund model. New compilations of satellite and experimental evidence suggest larger agricultural productivity gains due to CO2 growth are being experienced than are reflected in the fund parameterization. We also discuss recent studies applying empirical constraints to the probability distribution of equilibrium climate sensitivity, and we argue that previous Monte Carlo analysis of IAMs have not adequately reflected the findings of this literature. Updated the distributions of these parameters under varying discount rates is influential on the social cost of carbon estimates. The lower bound of the social cost of carbon is likely negative, and the upper bound is much lower than previously claimed, at least through the mid-21st century. Also, the choice of discount rate becomes much less important under the updated parameter distribution. So pretty much all of this is to say that the actual benefit of gradual increases in the CO2 in the atmosphere, we could actually see net benefit. It seems like other studies that have done or looked into the social cost of carbon or how much mal effects would happen in an increased warming atmosphere, they only take in one side of the ledger. So what this does is look at a bunch of the different effects. One of them is the agricultural productivity change. It says increasing the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide enhances plant growth, both by raising the rate of net photosynthesis and increasing water use efficiency within the plant. For numerous crop yields around the world, CO2 fertilization more than offsets the negative effects of climate change on crop water productivity, with some of the largest gains in arid and tropical regions, lengthening of growing seasons, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes through this. Obviously, I'm not going to read this entire report. I will link it in the show notes for those that want to get a little bit more in depth into this. But this is the science that we're debating. Like this is the idea. We're not denying climate. We're trying to have a more encompassing look a holistic look at the whole thing, the both sides of the ledgers, the benefits and the drawbacks. So, Jim, when you see a report like this, I mean, doesn't this just kind of like throw it in the face of the people that, you know, will routinely call us climate deniers? It's like, I think we're doing our due diligence here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Kevin Dyer-Rotten is a longtime friend of the Heartland Institute. He's actually going to be, I'll do this again, he's going to be presenting on that very paper at the 14th International Conference on Climate Change, May 7th and 8th in Las Vegas at the Caesars Palace. But Kevin's been working on this question of the social cost of carbon, really the social cost of carbon dioxide. But that's the nomenclature that's used in academic circles. And he started working on this question because he, as a statistician, thought that the work on this that was being promoted, and especially promoted by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was very one-sided, not balanced, and he thought, frankly, the data analysis was pretty bad. And so, and none of them actually looked at what the social benefits of a warmer world would be. The Climate Change Reconsidered, over this way, the Climate Change Reconsidered volumes over here over my shoulder, the last one on fossil fuels, and in fact, the second one on biological impacts, actually go into a lot of these questions, and they raise, really, for the only time in any prominent way, what are the benefits of a warming world? All we hear from the media, all we hear from the United Nations, and certainly all we hear from Greta Thunberg, is that a warming world is going to be a disaster for humans and plants and animals and the oceans everywhere. That is just not true. History shows you that a warming world has been better. The medieval warm period is called that because it was looking back at the climatic data over time through, grabbing CO2 bubbles in ice cores and that sort of thing. You can tell what the global temperature was. The medieval warm period was a great time for humans on this earth. We pulled ourselves out of the dark ages and started, advancing as a civilization during the medieval warm period. It was during this time that the Vikings discovered Greenland and called it Greenland for a very good reason, because it was green and not covered in ice. So a warmer world has many benefits. The United Nations does not talk about any of those benefits, and they actually exaggerate what the negative effects of more carbon dioxide and more use of fossil fuels in the world would be. One factor they never, I have to look through Kevin's paper again, or I could just give him a call and he could tell me this, but the benefits of burning fossil fuels, because it is a cheap, plentiful, and consistent, and you get consistent power out of it. It's not like solar or wind, where if it's not windy or solar or sunny, you don't get any power out of it. Has done enormous benefits, not just over time through history, but even today. The poor of the world need to have access to fossil fuels, probably more natural gas than coal, but they need that so that they can pull their societies out of poverty. These questions are never discussed at the United Nations. They just had the global, the World Economic Summit in Davos, and they talked about climate change. Nobody there, except for Trump, obliquely talked about the benefits of modern use of fossil fuels. So this is an important contribution to a global conversation on what is happening to our climate, what will happen to our climate, and what those effects will be, positive and negative, on human life and the globe in general.
Yeah, and another piece that I have here, this is posted on the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which talks about this study. It says that even if the assessment models were definitive, that determined that the social, the social cost of carbon was on the higher end, it still wouldn't justify like carbon pricing or regulation or trying to get rid of carbon dioxide mitigation. And that the idea that doing that has a social cost in itself. Just think about all of the male economic effects that would happen if we instituted the Green New Deal. It says the energy costs going higher, slower GDP growth, lower household incomes, welfare losses. And when this was presented to Obama officials, this objection was offered. They basically replied that the benefits of carbon energy are not relevant to the social cost of carbon itself, which is basically what I've been saying. They're only looking at the one side of the ledger. It's like, if I were to go to a grocery store to buy some food and they're only looking at the money that I'm giving them, it's like, but I'm getting food back. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous. But so, I mean, Justin, the science being settled, right? I mean, we shouldn't even be looking into this stuff. Shouldn't we just do the Green New Deal?
Yeah, well, I think that if you are in the Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders camp, you just saying that right now might cause you to get a fine or maybe even go to prison or something like that because you're spreading climate disinformation. And that apparently deserves to be, punished. You can't just have people talking about science in society. That's just not how things are done anymore. Look, I'm one of those people who believes that it's entirely, I actually don't think it's possible to tell. I'm not a scientist, but based on all of the scientific reading that I've done on this issue, which is a lot because I work at the Heartland Institute as part of my job, I don't know that we can tell for sure how much impact humans are having on temperature. I just don't think you can pin it down. I think it's too hard to do because our satellite temperature records are much more reliable than temperature records that were recorded prior to that. And all those temperature records that we have prior to using satellites have all been adjusted. And a lot of them were taken in areas that weren't ideal for taking temperatures. And there's all sorts of problems with the temperature record. So you have to adjust it in order to see any sort of long-term trends. And so I don't know that we can actually tell with any sort of certainty what the impact has been on climate change from humans with certainty. However, my position on all of this is exactly where we're at right now, which is I don't even really see what the big deal is, even if humans are the main contributor of climate change. I don't think it matters. I mean, I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but I don't think it really matters because I think the benefits of a warmer world are not just probably outweighing what it was prior to this period in time. I think it's unquestionably better. I think the benefits of a warmer world are historically, there is no doubt about it whatsoever. Empirically speaking, we are much, much better off with moderate warming. Do I want everywhere on the planet to look like the deserts of Nevada? No, I don't, obviously. But I don't think there's any evidence that shows even within ICC circles, even with not ICC, even with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the United Nations, even those folks, the scientists there won't say that it's highly likely that the world is going to enter into this post-apocalyptic hellscape. Even many of them won't say it if you actually read the scientific reports that they've put out. They say there's a possibility of it happening. And I don't even think that that's necessarily very likely. So I think at the end of the day, for me, the biggest issue is warming caused by human beings? I don't know. But is warming likely to be bad? No, I don't think it is likely to be bad. And I don't think that anybody who actually looks at the data objectively, looks at history objectively, looks at what happened during the Little Ice Age, the period before the Little Ice Age, looks at all of that information, can say honestly that we're worse off with a moderately warming planet. I just don't think that that's true. And we're seeing a greening of the earth. We're seeing all the things that were talked about in this paper and that have been done by all sorts of other scientists as well who have looked at the data, global crop yields, all sorts of things that we talk about all the time on this podcast and in the Heartland Institute, various materials that we've published. Right. The benefits of a warmer world are, in my opinion, far exceed any of the downsides to that.
Well, Jim, I will give you the final word on this and the ability to pitch that upcoming conference one more time.
Did I not mention it already? Okay, here.
So feel free to give the word, and then I want to move on to our final topic of the day.
Yeah, Justin is right. The only point I would add to what Justin just said, and it was a fantastic summary of kind of where Heartland stands on these issues, is that the modern world that we live in right now would not have been possible without the discovery and exploitation of fossil fuels from beneath the earth. And to think that we can advance in this coming century using only renewables, using only wind and solar, because the eco-left does not want to use nuclear. You could almost get behind that. That would be like a compromise position, or where you could have an adult conversation about what the future of energy consumption on the globe should be in the 21st century. But they don't want that. They want wind and solar because they pretend, and it's false, but they pretend that there's no cost to that it's free, that there's no downside to it. They don't talk about the children, the child labor that is used to get cobalt out of the ground on continents like Africa, that go into all of these renewable technologies, all of the rare earth metals that need to be mined out of the ground for these batteries, that if we had the technology to store the energy taken from solar and wind energy, that is extremely damaging to the environment. So they live in this fantasy world where they just think, the world will be clean and fresh, and as if humans weren't here, if only we would just stop using oil and natural gas. If we stop using oil and natural gas and coal to fuel this planet, it would be a global catastrophe that it would take an asteroid hitting the Earth would be almost as bad as what would happen if we did what Greta Thunberg said we should do at Davos, which is stop right now with the use of fossil fuels. It would be billions of people literally would die without the use of fossil fuels to keep the economy going, to keep the lights on, to keep the heat in their homes. That's just scratching the surface.
Yeah,
and
Jim,
so it'd be great to have an adult conversation about this. You're going to hear about that at our climate conference, by the way, on May 7th and 8th in Las Vegas. But these are the kind of discussions that need to be had on a global scale, and only on places like this podcast with the Heartland Institute to even broach the subject.
Yeah, and of course they're going to make that harder with what Justin alluded to. Elizabeth Warren floating the idea that Google should do something about people like us spreading disinformation on the. So it's going to get harder. But if you tune in, you'll obviously get the truth from us. I do want to move on. I want to bring on Ed Hudgins, a research director here at the Heartland Institute, to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is advancements in technology, artificial intelligence, automation, all of those great and wonderful things. Ed, I am very aware that this is also a topic that's near and dear to your heart.
A true fact, yes.
Yeah, so before we get into it, there's a couple of things that I want to talk about. One is a Soho.
What's the worst movie I've ever seen?
yeah, sure. I know what your favorite movie is, 2001: A Space Odyssey. But
that's right, yeah. And there it is, yeah. Actually, the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still has a very interesting environmental angle. The original movie from the 1950s was basically Klaatu comes to this planet to say, if you put nuclear weapons on missiles and endanger the civilizations of the other planets, we're going to destroy you. The horrible remake was basically, we're going to come and destroy all the humans on the earth because you guys are endangering the snail darters and, the frozen mud and so forth. It's incredibly anti-human movie. So ignore it. Go back and look at the Michael Rennie version. Okay.
But Ed, it starred Keanu Reeves. How could it be that bad?
Look, Keanu Reeves. What was the difference between the robot and Keanu Reeves? Well, the robot had more personality. Okay.
Burn.
What was your question, Donnie? Did you have something you wanted to talk about?
Are we doing like a anti-Keanu Reeves segment? Is that where this is headed, or?
Yeah.
Well, by the way, if you want to talk about Keanu Reeves, take a look at the last of the Matrix movies. I mean, I was rooting for the robots. Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
You would root for the robots, Ed. You would.
You always root for the robots, Ed. You always root for them.
You need to be on the podcast more. All right. So I want to talk about two things, both related to automation and artificial intelligence. One is a Soho Forum debate. And for those who are not aware, Soho Forum is done by the Reason Foundation. They do it, I don't know, monthly or something. There's always a different topic that they're discussing. It's very interesting stuff. I watch that all of the time. So they did a debate on will robots cause mass unemployment, as well as a Brookings Institution piece that is titled "What Jobs Are Affected by Artificial Intelligence." So this is a conversation that, well, first off, before we get into those topics, Ed, why don't you just kind of give us a little bit of an elevator pitch of like why you are a good person to talk to when it comes to this?
Well, because I like myself. No, I mean, seriously, my background, I do have a background in science. I've been following science policy going back to space policy. I've got a book that I did, Space, the Free Market Frontier. And I've been following the technology for quite a number of, actually, not just years, but decades. Because I consider myself a futurist, and I'm always saying, what's going to happen in the future? We have to be prepared. And from a political perspective, we can't let the left and the anti-freedom folks define what we do in the future. Can you imagine if they were in charge 30, 40 years ago, when Steve Jobs was kind of working in his garage, to figure out how to do a computer? Can you imagine what would happen if the government were in on the ground floor of regulating all of that and picking winners and losers and all? It would be horrible. So I want to keep the government out of these sorts of issues so that we can, in fact, progress and have a really great future.
Well, I want to keep Justin in on this conversation because he and I also have conversations relating to this all of the time. In fact, we did just prior to recording this episode. So I want to bring him on because I think he has a interesting perspective on this, especially from a kind of an economic point of view. But to have this conversation, Justin, I want you to abide by this. I want to have it in two parts. One is an idealistic look at the whole subject, and the other is kind of a pragmatic look at the subject. All right, can you restrain yourself to those rules, Justin?
I only play by street fighting rules. I don't know what we're talking about here. What is this?
All right, so yeah, let's just talk idealistic. All right, forget all the real life ramifications type of stuff. Let's just talk about it in just the kind of the idealistic libertarian perspective type of role first. So Ed, this Soho Forum debate that I've alluded to, it featured two gentlemen. Anthony Samaroff, who was kind of the pro artificial intelligence, is going to bring in an era of very cheap products and services, and we're all going to be much more wealthy under this kind of system. The other gentleman, Martin Ford, was kind of anti-artificial intelligence, basically saying that this is going to lead to job upheaval. A lot of people are going to be unemployed because of this, and it's going to be very hard for us to grapple with this as a society. So I guess first question for you, sir, is where do you fall, generally speaking, on this question?
Well, I very, very strongly fall on the side that artificial intelligence, robotics, and all of the exponential technology is going to be nothing but good for our society, with two exceptions we can talk about a little bit later. And again, even the opponent, Martin Ford, acknowledged that in fact, if you go back 250 years ago, with the Luddites were saying the Industrial Revolution is going to impoverish everyone. Marx was saying the Industrial Revolution is going to impoverish everyone, so we need to have a revolution and so forth. And what has happened over the last 250 years? Living standards have skyrocketed. We've eliminated poverty in much of the world, certainly in the advanced industrialized countries. Purchasing power has grown, and the reason is because technology increases productivity. And when you increase productivity, that means your labor is more valuable. You can trade it for more stuff, better known as goods and services, for those of you who are economists. And that's what always has happened. And the one concern, and neither of them addressed it in this debate, is they were saying, well, how many jobs are going to be displaced by robots or by automation? And one guy said maybe it's only 10% or 15%. Martin Ford said it might be more like 30 or 40%. I think it's going to be a little bit on the higher side. But here's the point, that, for example, when you replace typist jobs, like we did 30 to 40 years ago, with word processors, what did we get? Well, instead of typists, we got techs, right? But the thing is, it wasn't a straight off trade, because the technology meant that companies and individuals were much more productive. They were making more stuff, goods and services, and therefore everybody had a bigger pie, and the techs, could basically get more buying power than, let's say, a typist 40 or 50 years ago. And so that's what I'm seeing happening in the future with technology, except that we have a system today, government essentially dominated education system, that's disconnected from the market and from the needs of the market. And I think that is the big problem in the future, is to just like we have a technology revolution that's given us smartphones and computers and it's giving us all sorts of cool stuff. We need to have a revolution in the education sector, obviously a free market revolution, and get the government out of it as much as possible.
Yeah, so I think that this debate that I'm kind of referring to, the Soho Forum debate, is kind of along the lines of that the two parts that I was trying to define. It was an idealistic versus the pragmatic, because that the one gentleman that was in favor of he was kind of the pro artificial intelligence stance. He was basically saying that jobs are not there for the sake of having jobs; they're there for the sake of meeting people's needs. So if we are, the other gentleman, he references this idea that Jeff Bezos, obviously the head of Amazon, he is predicting that they're going to have the technology to be able to mimic in an artificial way, an automated way, the nimbleness of the human hand within 10 years. So this is going to be able to replace a whole host of jobs. We talked.
By the way, about a couple of weeks ago, they had exactly one of those robots demonstrated in a German factory that was able to sort through small electronic parts, which normally takes human beings to do. And they've got it to that point. Just in the last 5 years, they had a robot challenge that DARPA put up, Honda put up something similar. And so we've gone just in, let's say, 5 to 10 years, robots that couldn't walk, and every time you see one of these things, they'd be tripping and falling and all, to robots that can literally do backflips. That's the very quick progress that we've made literally in the last 5 years with robots. And so that's true. That's going to happen. We're going to have that kind of substitution for humans, say, sorting out little teeny parts. You're going to have that automated, just like you've had other stuff automated in the past.
Yeah, so he's talking about, and maybe he's going a little bit kind of hyperbolic when he's talking about this, but the idea that like we'll be able to produce goods and services at such a cheap and effective rate that when you go to a hotel, this is one of his quotes, you go to a hotel and you get a complimentary box of matches. Maybe next time you go there, you get a complimentary iPad. Like, stuff is just that cheap where they're able to give this stuff away. I mean, it like if you were, and I know that you're kind of a fan of Ray Kurzweil. I've been reading up on him a lot, but like this idea that like technology is going to expand in leaps and bounds, is that like a realistic reality to think about stuff, physical things being that cheap and inexpensive for the average consumer?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's going to be, you might say, spotty. In other words, it's not going to be every single service. And if you look at, say, the last 10 to 15, 20 years, you find there's been leaps and bounds in some areas, but not in other areas. And so it's kind of, it's kind of going to be like that. But here, there's a book that I'm reading right now, and I recommend it to everyone. It's called The Future is Faster Than You Think. It's by Peter Diamandis, who was the founder of the X Prize, co-founder with Ray Kurzweil of Singularity University. And that book with Stephen Kotler, by the way, actually looks at why, for example, they've actually tested flying cars now in Los Angeles.
Right.
They're not really so much cars as you almost might think of them as big, what do you call it? The big
drones, yeah.
Yeah. But the point is, the reason why that's happened, and this, they go into this in their book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, because you have convergence in the last, say, 5 years of certain kinds of technologies, information technologies, more sophisticated software that can regulate an engine, better materials that you can do with an engine, and things like this. So you are going to see that. You're literally seeing it now. You're seeing it in a kind of a spotty way that, with, for example, flying cars, we may end up having. And by the way, Uber is very interested in this.
Sure.
The next big thing is going to be flying Ubers, so to speak. So this sort of thing is coming. It's just, it's not coming in a straight line with every single industry. There's going to certainly be other industries.
We've talked on the podcast about self-driving cars all the time. I think even in this debate, the gentleman referenced
they came a little slower than many people thought, by the way.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. But the idea of like the smartphone and how it's put out of business, all of the camera makers or all the myriad of things that your cell phone can do. So basically, to like not fret about this stuff, life or people, society will find a way. So idealistically, I think we were probably all on the same page. Justin, you were very silent during that. I see that there's no objection. So if you would like, we can kind of move into the pragmatic.
No objection.
And this is where that gentleman on the other side of the debate, Martin Ford, was kind of always bringing up that the disruption that will be caused by this might be larger than we think. And I'll briefly bring up, and we can talk about this. the Brookings Institute report that I was referencing, what jobs are affected by AI? Better paid, better educated workers face most exposure. So this is basically beyond automation. This is beyond just the kind of the manufacturing, that the AI can start taking out these white collar jobs, so to speak. So maybe we can kind of have the same conversation, AI and automation. The one big one that Andrew Yang brings up all the time in his campaign is the idea of self-driving trucks. Is this going to lead to the elimination of all truck driving jobs? And if so, what are those people going to do? So, what say you to somebody that's very forward thinking about technology for these real life practical problems?
I thought you were talking to Ed.
I can talk about it if you
like.
I
was. I know, Justin, you have a thing, but go ahead, Ed.
Oh, no. I mean, the interesting thing, for example, in the debate that you mentioned, that self-driving truck issue was brought up, and there are about 3.5 million, truck delivery driver jobs in this country. What would happen tomorrow, literally, if that's $170 billion a year industry? What if they were all eliminated? Well, what that would mean is that prices to deliver goods and services to Walmart, Target, for Amazon, and so forth would go down. And so people going to Walmart, Target, and places like that would be paying lower prices for their goods and services. And so, the point is, in the long run, purchasing power goes up because productivity goes up. There is an issue, as I mentioned, about retraining and about the fact that our schools, and especially I'm talking about government schools, do not prepare folks to meet the market needs. There's also an important issue about, for example, we have we have unemployment insurance in this country. What that means, the government takes a chunk of your money, right, from every paycheck, sticks it in a pot. And then if you're unemployed, you get a certain amount every week or whatever it is, during that transition time. Well, there's an interesting book that came out from American, ARI, or not ARI, but AEI, on robot proof. And the issue there is, couldn't we come up with a saving system where I get a sort of pot of money that I'm saving up, and then I could use it to retrain myself? And again, this came up actually 30 some years ago when people were talking about free trade eliminating all of our jobs because everything was going to be made in Asia. So what do we do? And this issue came up about, what about empowering the worker to retrain themselves and to be lifelong retrainers, so to speak? And it unfortunately didn't go anywhere. So there are a lot of things that we can do on the practical side to allow for this transition. By the way, just want to mention one other very important thing that didn't come up in this debate, and that is that some jobs, the idea of even talking about a job is not going to make a lot of sense. I want to read you a very interesting quote. This is from 1989. Neil Gross, I think, made this quote. In the next century, planet Earth will don an electronic skin. It will use the internet as a scaffold to support and transmit its sensations. The skin is already being stitched together. Millions of embedded electrical measuring devices, thermostats, pressure gauges, pollution detectors, cameras, microphones, glucose sensors, EKGs, et cetera, and I won't go through the whole thing. Here's the point. AI is good because it takes lots of data and it does stuff with it. Now, right now, when you think about your healthcare, you think about, well, I have to go to a doctor, every year, or if I have a problem with myself, et cetera, I go to a doctor. We think of a job as a medical doctor. We think of a job as the nurse practitioners, the people who are doing the tests on you, et cetera. A development just in the last couple of years has been a ring. This is my wedding ring, not the ring that I'm talking about, that actually can measure most of your biosigns. So you might not ever have to walk into a doctor's office because all that information is already going out there, right? And it might even be that if it looks like something's going on in your body because an AI has detected that there's a precursor of a heart attack going on in you, instead of you having a heart attack and hopefully somebody will find you and get you to the hospital in time, the ring has already told the medics, you're about to have a heart attack. You better get there.
Right.
That's the sort of world we're talking about with AI and with sensors everywhere. The danger, of course, is if the government controls those sensors, if Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren controls those sensors, then we're in bad shape. But this is the kind of thing where we're not even talking about what is a job of a doctor or so forth. That's kind of, yeah, you're going to probably still have doctors to do stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
it's going to be a very, very different world.
So I have like a couple of responses when people talk about this idea of this like technological driven joblessness that could possibly happen. And one of my responses is the idea of the kiosks at a fast food place instead of a clerk, right? Robots taking over those jobs. And it's like we've had that technology for like 10 years. Why aren't they at every single place? And it's because it's a gradual thing. People still have labor that they can supply, and that is still purchasable. So this idea that it's going to happen overnight won't happen. But all of those people that are potentially displaced are voters as well. So that kind of brings in, like, is it politically, is it inevitable? Is it a political inevitability that the government is going to offer some type of solution, whether it's a job guarantee or a universal basic income or something along those lines? Justin, feel free to jump in with your concerns here, but I don't know. It seems like this is going to be something that's going to be a topic of discussion in the next all of the next political cycles.
Yeah, my primary issue is not that I necessarily disagree with anything that Ed said here. I don't really disagree with a whole lot of it. I think my primary concern is that if we didn't have a welfare state, we didn't have a government that is going to try to use these technologies to their benefit, then I really wouldn't be very worried about it at all. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we have all these structures in place, the fact that we have all of these gigantic bureaucracies in place, regulatory agencies in place, politicians that would benefit from this kind of control over society, all of that is already in place. That's where I see this being extremely dangerous. And really, from a political standpoint, whether there's something, I'm always on the lookout for these issues where the liberal side, and not just liberal side, but I mean, this is a core socialist issue, really, that they've been talking about for going all the way back to the days of Karl Marx, talking about technology taking people's jobs. If you look at the liberal side of the equation, it's very easy for them to present an argument that will scare people into another big government program, another big tax, another big regulatory agency, because they can say you're going to lose your jobs. And it's very easy to see how someone might think that's going to happen. The other side is much more complicated. You're saying, oh, don't worry about these jobs that are going to go away. New jobs that we don't even know about necessarily, are going to develop, and you'll be able to get those jobs. So you're trying to convince people who don't have these skills that they'll develop skills for jobs that don't yet exist at some point in the future at a time that they're not sure of yet. And I agree that probably would happen in a free market. But that is a very difficult argument to make politically. And the normal market forces that drive people to innovate and have driven people to innovate in the past, historically, when technology takes jobs away from people, are being eroded by the welfare state. And that's really the core issue. The government's going to come along. It's not going to give the economy a chance to find new jobs. It's going to come along and it's going to say, don't even worry about it. We're going to take care of you. Right. Or we're going to stop this technology from ever existing in the first place. And that's really the thing that scares me the most.
Yeah. So Ed, I'll give you the last word on this. We are running out of time, so I'll give you the last before we say goodbye to you, sir.
Yeah, look, I think Justin is right about this. And that's my concern. That's why I think people on the libertarian, conservative, right-wing side have to get ahead of this issue. We are the pro-growth people. We are the pro-technology people. We realize that everybody, especially the people who are the poorest, are going to benefit from technology. We need to get ahead of the game. For example, on getting institutional incentives for people to get apprenticeship trainings, instead of wasting time in a 4-year college if it's not going to give them anything. We need to get ahead of this issue. So, so that the left does not take it over, and so that their approaches look kind of silly because we're controlling our own destiny. So I think this should be an top agenda item. If we don't want to get the left basically taking over this kind of stuff and regulating the technology out of existence,
Right.
or preventing new technology from coming along.
All right, fantastic. I absolutely agree. This is a topic that I would totally rather talk about on a more consistent basis than some of the other things. So, yeah, definitely. Edward Hudgins, research director here at the Heartland Institute. Thank you for being on with me.
I love to do it. Looking forward to do it next time.
All right, fantastic. I'll keep you in mind. All right, gentlemen. Well, I think that's going to pretty much do it here. You gonna watch there's some sporting event this weekend? I don't know. It's like football, or is that the one with the goalies? I don't know. Who's winning? Who do you guys
There
got?
was a team in Boston, but they I don't know, they don't seem to be around. I saw them in years past.
Justin.
I liked them. I saw them in years past, but
They did leave Boston a long time ago. That was in the 90s.
I know, well,
I think.
the Boston area, New England.
I think Jim and I would agree on this, that Donnie is not really an American. So I think you should leave the podcast. We've been talking about who we should vote off and off the podcast, and I know that that Isaac, Mr. Wisconsin, if he were here.
So Jim, who do you think is going to win the big game? Who's going to score the most goals?
Oh my God! The Kansas City Chiefs
like talking to a European.
I know, and it's just the fact that it's fake is even more pathetic. So the Chiefs are the one. It's going to be the Chiefs. Chiefs 35, San Francisco 28.
All right,
they're the better rounded team, but all right.
Yeah. All right, give us your prediction, Justin.
I don't know. I think 35-28 actually is not a bad score. Maybe I'll do 35-31. It's gonna be a shootout, I think, for sure.
All right. Producer extraordinaire, you got any strong feelings about this bout?
Yeah, honestly, San Francisco is the more well-rounded team, but got to go with Patrick Mahomes.
Okay, gibberish to me. Thank you, gentlemen, for tuning in. Thank you all, audience. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Please join us every Friday for a new episode. Again, listeners who are just on iTunes and Spotify and SoundCloud, we are on YouTube. Check us out. See our beautiful shining faces. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can at In the Tank Pod. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, anecdotes, jokes, feel free to email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter. Look for that big, beautiful blue check mark. It's still there.
That's right. They haven't taken it away from you yet.
Haven't taken it away. Not yet.
Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
Well, the fine people can find me May 7th and 8th in Las Vegas and at the beautiful Caesar's Palace Casino and Resort for the our next climate conference.
What is it for? Why?
It's for the 14th. Be quiet. It's for the 14th International Conference on Climate Change, and we're going to be there. But you can also find me on Twitter at @JLakely at Twitter, and also follow the Heartland Institute at Heartland Inst.
All right, Ed, if you have any places that people can find you if they're interested in the topic.
Oh well, obviously at the Heartland, I'm all over the Heartland website. Also Facebook, Edward Hudgins at Facebook, and I post there all the time and get into debates with the lefties, so it's always fun. And of course, I've got a Twitter account, so look me up at Edward Hudgins on Twitter.
And producer extraordinaire, thank you for doing this, and we'll talk to you next week.
Someone in that control room is out of control.